They told us detention platform Sigma-9 was escape-proof. They said it the way you say a thing when you want to hear yourself believe it. The Keth commandant, we called him the colonel, because he wore rank the way the Keth wore everything, like armor against the idea that anything could touch them, said it the first morning, standing in the central yard with 6 of his troopers arrayed behind him like a wall of chitin and contempt. His translation collar buzzed when he spoke, turning whatever passed for his voice into flat, mechanical standard. "No prisoner has left this platform alive," he said. "No prisoner will." I was standing in the second row of the intake formation. 43 human officers, scraped out of downed fighters and burning hulks across the Vega corridor. Pilots, mostly. A few navigators. One ship's surgeon named Cavendish who'd been pulled out of an escape pod before he even knew his cruiser was gone. We were cold, we were thin, and we were in the outer dark some 30 light minutes from anything that wasn't Keth. The platform hung against a black field of stars that meant nothing to us. No constellations we knew, no beacon we could read. We were, by every practical measure, finished. I was Captain Vance Hiltz. My record said serial escape artist. The Keth record said the same thing, which is why they'd put me in isolation for the first 12 hours before they bothered processing me with the rest. When they finally marched me into the yard, I had a rubber pressure seal ring I'd lifted from a maintenance panel in my pocket, and I was already measuring the gap between the outer fence emitter posts. We had a name for what we were supposed to do. Every captured officer did. It was in the code we flew under, the same code that said you gave your rank and nothing else when they asked. It was your duty to try to escape, not because you'd necessarily make it, not even because you'd necessarily hurt them by trying, but because every hour they spent chasing you was an hour they weren't spending killing someone else. Every resource they pulled to run you down was a resource that didn't go to the front. You were, in your failure and your recapture and your bloody-minded refusal to simply sit, still a soldier, still fighting. That was the theory anyway. In practice, it mostly just meant the isolation cell. I spent a lot of time in isolation on Sigma-9. The cells were featureless oblongs of gray composite. The Keth built everything the same way, without corners or decoration, without anything that suggested individual space might be worth making comfortable. I bounced a ball against the wall to keep my head straight. I'd taken it off a dead Keth trooper on Kepler Station, months before. Pale and heavy, dense as lead, the size of my fist. Every time it came back to my hand I counted. One more second I'd given them nothing. One more second I was still here. The first week, I made 2 attempts. Both were sloppy, I'll own that. The perimeter fence ran a rotating phase shift that I hadn't fully mapped, and the second time I went over I caught the edge of it and spent 3 seconds locked in a full-body muscle seizure on the ground outside the wire before the patrol units walked up and carried me back. The colonel had me brought to his office, a room twice the size of my cell, bare except for the single piece of Keth furniture that wasn't a wall, the standing platform they used instead of chairs, and told me in that flat mechanical voice that the next escape attempt would result in termination. "Then I'll be more careful," I said. He looked at me for a long time with those compound eyes. The Keth didn't blink. They also didn't understand, quite, the thing I was saying. I watched him process it, and I watched it fail to translate into anything he recognized as a meaningful statement. "You will be placed in isolation," he said. "I know," I said. They put me back in isolation, and I bounced my ball. That was where I met Ives. Archibald Ives, Archie, to anyone who'd served with him, though he'd been alone long enough that I wasn't sure he remembered anyone had. He'd been in the cell next to mine for 11 days before they processed me in. When I heard him scratching at the shared wall on the second night, I scratched back, and that was how it started. Morse wasn't something the Keth monitored for because they didn't use it, which was exactly the sort of operational blindness that kept human prisoners alive. He'd been on Sigma-9 for 4 months. He'd watched 3 men die trying to get through the fence. He'd stopped eating well and started eating barely. When they finally moved us both to general population after 30 days in the box, I could see it in him, that particular hollowness that sets in when a man has been alone too long with his fear. He wasn't broken, not exactly, but he was bending in a way that worried me. General population was a long prefabricated module the Keth had anchored to the platform's midsection, 200 meters of bunk frames and recycled air, and the low hum of the containment field that kept our atmosphere breathable. 109 human prisoners, by that count. Pilots, engineers, a few ground assault soldiers who'd been taken on the Meridian incursion. And at the center of it, running it the way a good senior officer runs anything, quietly, precisely, with total authority and no wasted motion, was Squadron Commander Roger Bartlett. I'd heard of Bartlett. Most human pilots had. The Keth called him something that translated, roughly, as the persistent problem. He'd organized 3 mass escape attempts from 2 previous facilities, and the Keth had moved him to Sigma 9 specifically because they believed their new platform was beyond his abilities. They brought him in under escort of 8 troopers, which was 6 more than they used for anyone else, and when the colonel had him brought to that bare office, the colonel told him directly, there would be no escapes from this platform. Bartlett listened. He nodded. He was back in general population in 2 hours, and by that evening he'd already started mapping the guard rotation. He came to me on my 3rd day in Gen Pop. Just walked up to my bunk, unhurried, and sat down on the edge with the ease of a man who owns the room he's standing in. Hiltz, he said, I've read your file, both the official one and the one Sergeant MacDonald keeps. MacDonald keeps files. On everyone, he's thorough. He folded his hands. I want to talk to you about something larger than the 2 breakouts you've already run. I looked at him. How large? 200, he said. The number sat between us for a moment. 200 prisoners through the wire, he said. Not 1, not 5, not a glory run for a single man. 200, simultaneous, organized. Because when 200 human prisoners hit the outer dark at once, the Keth don't chase 20 of them while the rest scatter. They have to mobilize for all of them. Every trooper, every patrol craft, every tracking asset they have within 6 sectors gets pulled off whatever it was doing and redirected to finding us. That's a logistics disruption they can't absorb quietly. That pulls real weight off the Vega front. Most of them won't make it, I said. No, he said. He didn't soften it or argue it. Most of them won't, but the ones who do will reach friendly space carrying platform schematics, Keth patrol schedules, and the first real intelligence on Sigma 9's operational footprint that we'll have had. And the ones who don't will still have cost the Keth something. He looked at me levelly. I need a scrounger. Someone who can move through this facility and find what isn't supposed to be findable, and I need your instinct for the perimeter's weak points. Are you in? I thought about the colonel's compound eyes and the flat mechanical voice, and the 30 days alone in a gray room with a rubber ball. Yeah, I said, I'm in. His organization was something to watch. The man had a mind built for this, not the loud, improvised kind of escape that I tended to run, but a slow, careful, layered thing. Every role assigned to the right person. Every resource cataloged, budgeted, used twice before it was discarded. The digging teams went to Dix and Velinsky. Dix was a rail-thin lieutenant from the lunar colonies who had the patience of granite and the ability to work in a space barely wider than his shoulders without ever showing the fear it cost him. Velinsky was a different story, broad, strong, and secretly terrified of enclosed spaces in a way that he managed through sheer will and which would, eventually, come close to destroying him. Together they were extraordinary. They designated 3 tunnels, codenamed with simple words we all remembered: Foundation, Hollow, and Out. Foundation was the furthest along. Driven beneath the module's east end toward what Bartlett had calculated was the platform's outer maintenance corridor. Hollow and Out were sealed as Foundation progressed, kept as backups. Dispersal was Ashley Pitt's problem, and it was a genuine one. The Keth running the compound did regular sweeps of the area outside the module, and fresh digging material scattered across the ground would register immediately on their sensors. Ashley Pitt, Royal Navy by training, which meant he had a particular fondness for solving problems sideways, developed a system of pouches sewn inside our standard issue coveralls, packed with excavated material that could be slowly worked loose as a man walked the yard. Shuffle forward, let a little fall, shuffle on. The Keth swept the dirt without ever understanding what it meant. Griffith handled disguises. We had no civilian clothing, but we had coveralls, and we had the particular human talent for making something out of whatever's available. Griffith could look at a torn maintenance uniform and see in it something close enough to a Keth maintenance contractor's working gear to get a man through a checkpoint in poor light. He was methodical about it, almost artistic, cataloging each piece by quality and utility, and filing them in a concealed cache beneath the third row of bunks. The forgeries were Blythe's domain, and Blythe was going blind. He didn't say so for the first 6 weeks. He'd been the finest document forger in the human intelligence apparatus before he was shot down, and he kept working with the precision of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, producing entry passes, Keth maintenance authorizations, false transit records on salvaged polymer sheeting in the dim light of a jury-rigged phosphor lamp, while the myopia that had been advancing on him for years closed in around his edges. When I finally noticed him holding his work an inch from his face to read it, I asked him straight, "How bad?" "Bad enough," he said. "Not bad enough to stop, not yet." I told Bartlett. Bartlett was quiet about it for a long moment, then assigned me to Blythe as his secondary, his guide in practice, the person who would be beside him every step of the escape when the night came. I didn't argue. Blythe was worth 100 transit passes, and he knew the platform's administrative codes better than anyone alive. MacDonald ran intelligence, which meant he ran the human infrastructure the Keth didn't know existed, the network of men who'd cultivated enough routine contact with the guard rotations to know the timing of every shift change, the blind spots in the sensor coverage, the particular habits of individual troopers. The Keth operated with hive logic. What one unit knew, all units knew, but only within their designated operational channel. A guard unit on the east perimeter didn't communicate with the administrative processors on the station's upper level, unless a protocol required it. MacDonald learned those protocols and learned which gaps between them could be walked through quietly. There was one additional piece of the operation that Bartlett needed, and that I was in the best position to provide. He needed a full map of the platform exterior, the distance from the tunnel exit to the maintenance corridor, the exact positioning of the patrol units on the outer hull, the locations of the emergency hatches that led to the docking cradles where supply shuttles arrived every 9 days. He needed a man to go outside, map what he found, and come back with it. "You're going to need to let them catch you again," Bartlett said. "I know. And this time, instead of running for the fence, you go for the maintenance access." "I know. And then you allow yourself to be brought back." "That part," I said, "is less appealing." I went 3 nights later. The gap in the sensor rotation that MacDonald had identified was 42 seconds wide, and it came at 3:40 platform time, when the Eastern Quadrant Guard unit completed its circuit and crossed behind the module to begin the Western Pass. 42 seconds to reach the access hatch, get it open, map what I could in the maintenance corridor beyond, and either get clear or get caught in a way that looked like a genuine escape attempt rather than a reconnaissance run. I went over the fence on the 17th second. The maintenance corridor was cold and dark and smelled of the particular chemical signature the Keth used in their fabrication processes, sharp, almost medicinal, like the inside of a machine that had been running too long. I had 25 seconds and I used all of them. The corridor ran 40 meters to the first emergency hatch. Beyond it, I could see the docking cradle's outer frame. I committed the geometry to memory, with the kind of focus that isolation teaches you, the kind that burns detail into your mind because you know you won't get a second look. The patrol caught me at the 39th second. 3 troopers, moving faster than their rotation should have allowed. I found out later that a sensor flag from the fence crossing had pushed their schedule. I was back in isolation by 400. The colonel had me in his office by morning. "You were in the maintenance corridor," he said. "I got lost," I said. His compound eyes regarded me with the flat, patient attention the Keth gave to things they intended to eventually eliminate. "Your persistence is noted," he said. "It will not change the outcome." "Probably not," I agreed. He put me in isolation for another 30 days. I bounced my ball. When I came back to Gen Pop, I went straight to Bartlett and gave him everything I'd mapped. He spread the information across the picture in his head, the distances, the hatch locations, the docking cradle schedule, and fitted it into the plan with the quiet satisfaction of a man placing the last piece in a puzzle he's been building for months. "Foundation is close," he said. "We're 3 weeks out, maybe 4. That was when they found it. We'd organized a celebration, small, controlled, careful in the way everything we did was careful. It was the anniversary of a particular human victory at Kepler Station, and we had brewing materials that had been accumulating in the concealed cache for 2 months. Hiltz and Goff and a third man named Morrow had been running a still inside a hollowed-out water reclamation unit, and the result was not something you'd describe as good, but it was strong, and it was ours. 2 hours into it, with enough men loose enough to be genuinely loud for the first time in weeks, one of the Keth maintenance units doing a routine floor inspection under the bunks found the tunnel entrance. Foundation was gone. I watched Ives when the colonel's announcement came over the platform address. I'd been watching him for weeks. He'd been getting better, or I told myself he was getting better, in the way you tell yourself comfortable things when the alternative is admitting something you're not ready to deal with. He hadn't been getting better. He'd been getting quieter, which isn't the same thing at all. When the announcement came, he walked out of the module into the yard with the focused, deliberate step of a man who has made a decision. I was moving before I understood why. I got to within 10 meters of him when he reached the fence. "Archie," I said. He didn't look back. He took the wire in both hands and started climbing. The troopers shot him before he reached the top. I stood in the yard for a long time after they took him. The stars above the platform were the same stars they'd always been: cold, indifferent, meaning nothing. I thought about the rubber ball in my pocket. I thought about what the colonel had said: "Your persistence will not change the outcome." I thought about Archie Ives and the 11 days he'd spent alone in a cell next to mine, scratching at the wall. Then I went inside and found Bartlett. "Harry," I said. He looked at me. That was the third tunnel's name out, we'd called it, but I used the old word from a story I'd read once, about men in an older war who'd done something like this before us. Harry felt right. It felt like something that had already been earned by someone else's blood and deserved to be used again. "Harry," I said, "we open it tomorrow, we don't wait." "Velinsky hasn't stabilized," Bartlett said, "and we're 3 weeks short of." "Archie Ives," I said, "is dead, and the colonel just looked at 43 of us in that yard and saw 43 things that can be put down whenever it's convenient. I am not going to wait 3 more weeks for him to decide it's convenient." Bartlett was quiet. He had the disciplined mind of a man who planned carefully and waited and absorbed new information before he moved, and I could see all of that working behind his eyes. Then he nodded. "Harry," he said, "we reopen it in 48 hours. Velinsky's collapse came on the 3rd day of the new dig. It was Dix who told me, came to my bunk in the middle of the night with the quiet urgency of a man trying not to wake the room. "He's at the tunnel entrance," Dix said. "He says he can't go in." I went with him. Velinsky was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his hands on his knees, and his breathing coming in the short, controlled way of a man fighting a panic he has named and named and named until the numbing doesn't work anymore. I crouched in front of him. "How deep are we?" I asked. He looked at me. 86 meters. "To the maintenance corridor." 109. He shook his head. "I can't do it." "You don't have to go back in," I said. "Someone has to, the face is." "Dix will go," I said. I looked at Dix. Dix looked back with the expression of a man who has already made the calculation and knows what it costs and is going to pay it anyway. "You go in and you finish the face. Velinsky, you run the line. You pull the material back. You breathe the outside air and you pull the line. That's all you do." Velinsky stared at me. "Your people need 109 more meters," I said. "So we dig 109 more meters." He worked the line for 6 days. He never went back in. He was there every shift, hands on the cable, pulling material back through the dark with the steadiness of a man who has found the one thing he can still do and is doing it until it's done. Blythe finished his last batch of transit documents on the night before the breakout. He held the final one up in front of the phosphor lamp, and I watched him squint at it with eyes that were fighting him, trying to resolve something that was getting harder to resolve. He turned it to me. "Tell me it's right," he said. I looked at it. The Keth administrative script was perfect. The authorization codes that MacDonald had pulled from a maintenance contractor's discarded work log were correctly formatted, accurately spaced. "It's right," I said. He set it down with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman finishing a piece. "Good," he said. "Then I'm done." "Not yet," I said. "We go tomorrow night." "Right," he said. "Not yet." The breakout was supposed to begin at 200. The tunnel had been completed 2 days prior, and Cavendish's final survey. He had the best spatial sense of anyone in the group, could walk a tunnel in darkness and tell you its angle of drift to within 2 degrees, had confirmed what none of us wanted to hear. We were 20 feet short of the maintenance corridor. 20 feet of open ground between the tunnel exit and the cover of the corridor wall, under clear sensor coverage, with no concealment. We had one advantage. Every 9 days, a supply shuttle arrived at the docking cradle, and the shuttle's approach triggered a mandatory communications blackout across the platform's eastern sensor array for the duration of docking, a Keth protocol that existed to prevent signal interference with the shuttle's navigation systems. The blackout window was 11 minutes. "We go in the window," Bartlett said. 11 minutes, MacDonald said, "for 200 men." "We won't get 200, Bartlett said. He said it the same way he'd said most of them won't make it back at the beginning, flat and clear and without apology, because lying about what something costs doesn't change what it costs. "We get as many as we get. We have the transit documents, the disguises, the mapped routes to the emergency hatches. The men who make it to the docking cradle before the window closes have a shot at the shuttle bays. The men who don't have the maintenance corridor. Move fast, stay with your partner, and do not stop." I was with Blythe. I had his arm in the tunnel and his arm in the open, and his arm in the maintenance corridor when we reached it, the two of us flat on the composite floor with the sounds of movement behind us. Dozens of men flowing through the tunnel and out into the cold dark, and across 20 feet of exposed ground in the 11-minute gap between one shuttle's docking tone and the moment the sensor array came back online. Cavendish was the one who slipped. He was behind us, managing the rope system that I'd used to signal the waiting men inside: 1 pull, clear; 2 pulls, hold. And when he went down in the open ground, his elbow caught a sensor plate that should have been inactive and wasn't. The alarm came on at the 8-minute mark. Bartlett's voice, somewhere behind me in the corridor: "Move." 61 men made it into the maintenance corridor before the outer barrier sealed. The rest, and there were 139 of them, were locked back inside the module, and what happened to them I only learned later from a repatriation report after the war was done. The colonel was thorough. I'll give him that. He was methodical in a way that the Keth were always methodical. He processed them back through the facility with a kind of bureaucratic completeness that didn't include anger, because the Keth didn't waste energy on anger. Just consequence, administered with hive efficiency. In the maintenance corridor, we split the way the plan said to split. 3 groups, 3 routes, 3 chances. Bartlett's group went for the upper administrative hatch. The longest route, the highest risk, the one that required the Keth transit documents Blythe had built, because there were 2 checkpoints between the corridor and the route that led to the shuttle terminal. MacDonald's group went for the emergency service tunnels that ran parallel to the outer hull, targeting the fuel transfer junction, where the Keth ran a crew of 2 human maintenance contractors they'd pressed into service, men who owed nothing to the Keth and who, we had reason to believe, owed something to us. I took the 3rd group, 7 men, Blythe included. We went for the docking cradle. The cradle route was the most direct and the most exposed. 200 meters through the maintenance corridor, 1 set of blast doors that had been propped open by Sedgwick 3 days prior during a sanctioned maintenance detail. Sedgwick was Australian and had a gift for acquiring things that weren't supposed to be acquirable, a quality I respected enormously. And then the cradle itself, which the supply shuttle was still occupying, its crew inside running their own post-docking checklist. The shuttle crew were Keth. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say the Keth didn't understand individual defiance. It wasn't that they were stupid. They were highly functional, highly organized, and within the structures of their hive logic, they were tactically sophisticated. What they lacked was the concept of a single organism choosing to do something that the collective had not decided was the appropriate response to conditions. They planned for attempts. They planned for the probability of escape and built their security around managing that probability. What they did not plan for was the particular human property of continuing to attempt something that has already been designated impossible, not because you've assessed new information that changes the probability, but because you are still angry. The shuttle crew had 4 members. I had 7 men and a forged maintenance authorization in Blythe, who was nearly blind and holding my arm and carrying in his head the accumulated administrative logic of the entire Keth detention system. Tell them, I said to Blythe, that we're here for the manifest reconciliation. Tell them we need the cargo transfer logs. Blythe spoke. His Keth was better than mine. His Keth was, in fact, nearly perfect. The same mind that forged the documents had spent months absorbing the language from every scrap of Keth administrative communication that passed through the facility. He spoke, and the crew responded, and I watched their behavior for the tells that meant recognition, the particular stiffening and regrouping that hive logic creatures show when a datum doesn't fit the expected pattern. 3 of the 4 accepted the authorization and returned to their checklist. The 4th held it a moment too long. I hit him with the tool Sedgwick had acquired, a Keth maintenance implement, heavy and blunt, not designed for what I used it for, and we had the 4th one down before the others completed the turn. What followed was ugly and fast, and I won't dress it up. 4 Keth shuttle crew, 7 human prisoners who had been running on anger and recycled air and potato moonshine for 6 months, in a space not much larger than the module's common room. When it was over, we were all standing and they were not. "Can anyone fly this thing?" I said. A man named Goff, navigator, lunar merchant fleet before the war, said he'd flown Keth transit craft in a simulator during a recon exchange 3 years ago. "It's been a while," he said. "How long is a while?" 3 years. "That's recent enough," I said. "Get in the seat." Goff flew. I won't pretend it was clean. The Keth platform's docking protocol requires a lockdown authorization from the station's administrative unit before a shuttle can undock in a non-emergency status, and we didn't have that authorization, so we left without it, which triggered every alarm on the platform simultaneously. By the time we cleared the docking cradle's magnetic field, There were two Keth interceptor craft already turning from their patrol positions. Goff pushed the shuttle's drive to a level the Keth design hadn't anticipated, and we ran. The interceptors were faster in a straight line. They always are. Keth military craft are built for pursuit, clean and efficient, and designed around the assumption that whatever they're chasing will eventually accept the logic of the situation and stop. We didn't stop. Goff ran us through the debris field of the old Meridian battle station, a field that every Keth navigation system was programmed to avoid because the Keth were meticulous about their equipment, and the debris field would have destroyed a ship that didn't know exactly where it was going. We didn't know exactly where we were going either, but we had less to lose, and that's a different kind of navigation. One interceptor pulled out at the field's edge, the other followed us in. We lost it in the debris. I don't know if they pulled out or if they didn't make it. I know we came out the other side with 3 hull warnings screaming and Goff, white-knuckled on the controls, and Blythe sitting behind me with his near-blind eyes directed at the viewport, and the faint expression of a man who is choosing to find this interesting rather than terrifying. "How far to the relay beacon?" I asked Goff. He checked. "At this speed, 4 hours. "Drive at this speed," I said. Of the 61 men who made it into the maintenance corridor, 47 eventually reached safety. Bartlett's group ran their transit documents through 2 checkpoints and reached the shuttle terminal to find it locked down. The alarm had beaten them to it, and they held that position for 6 hours in the terminal's service access before a maintenance cycle opened a side hatch and they moved. Bartlett himself and MacDonald beside him were caught in the outer corridor 20 meters from the emergency egress point. The Keth patrol that found them was authorized for immediate resolution of escaped prisoners. They exercised that authorization. I found out about Roger Bartlett from the repatriation report, the same way I found out about most things that happened that night, and I will not pretend I received that information with the equanimity of a soldier who knew the cost going in. I knew the cost going in. Knowing it doesn't make it easier to hold. MacDonald's group got through the fuel transfer junction with help from the 2 human contractors, who turned out to be more than willing once the situation was explained to them. 3 of MacDonald's 7 reached a rescue beacon and were picked up by a recon patrol 40 hours later. Sedgwick's route, the service tunnels, produced 12 survivors, which was more than anyone had planned for. Sedgwick had a gift. We reached the relay beacon in 4 hours and 13 minutes. The beacon was old, a pre-war unit, barely functional, and the signal we sent was weak, and we sat in that shuttle for 31 hours eating Keth rations that tasted like mineral paste and listening to Goff count the hull stress readings aloud, because counting things gave him something to do with his hands. Blythe slept. The rest of us mostly didn't. The rescue craft was a human frigate running a deep survey of the Vega corridor's outer edge. They picked up our beacon on the second pulse and changed course. The crew who came aboard to meet us were young. Most of them seemed young to me by then, and their faces did a particular thing when they saw what we were. Thin, damaged, wearing Keth maintenance coveralls with machine burns and old blood on them, and carrying nothing but a ball and a set of nearly blind eyes, and the memory of 200 men who'd had the nerve to try. The young officer who took my statement asked me how we'd done it. I thought about Bartlett's flat, organized patience, about Dix in the tunnel face, working by feel, about Velinsky with his hands on the cable, breathing the outside air and pulling, about Blythe holding a transit document up to a lamp with eyes that were leaving him, making it perfect anyway, about Archie Ives at the wire, and what happens to a man when the thing he needs most is the one thing the people holding him have decided he can't have. "We refuse to stay," I said. The officer wrote that down. I don't know what he did with it. I don't know if it ended up in the report, or if the report ended up in some file that a staff analyst summarized and compressed into a line of strategic data about Sigma 9's operational vulnerabilities. I don't know if anyone read it at all. But 47 men walked out of the outer dark, and a Keth maximum security detention platform burned 3 full defense squadrons and 2 weeks of patrol reallocation chasing the rest of us. And somewhere in the Vega corridor, the front moved a fraction because of resources that were in the wrong place. We refused to stay. The rubber ball is still in my pocket. I still reach for it sometimes when the nights get long. It comes back to my hand the same as it always did. One more second.